The gavel slammed down, echoing through the desolate bankruptcy court, sealing her fate. Left with nothing but a ruined credit score and a few crumpled $100 bills, Sloane Harper made a desperate, entirely irrational choice at the county tax auction. She bought a toxic, flooded limestone pit. The ink on the Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing was barely dry, but the humiliation had already seeped into Sloane Harper's bones. In a time when her peers were graduating college or backpacking across Europe, Sloane was standing on the steps of the Oak Haven County Courthouse with exactly $1,800 to her name. It was all she had managed to hide from the liquidators. Her financial ruin had not been born of frivolous spending or lazy habits. It was the result of a spectacular betrayal. Earlier, Sloane had poured her life savings and a modest inheritance into a supply chain logistics startup called Navicor. Her business partner, a charismatic and ruthless older entrepreneur named Vance Calder, had handled the legal framework. Vance had expertly structured the LLC to shield his own assets while quietly tethering the company's massive lines of credit directly to Sloane's personal social security number. When Navicor collapsed under the weight of an aggressive and illegal expansion strategy orchestrated by Vance, he walked away completely unscathed. Sloane was left holding a debt of over $400,000. The banks took her apartment, her car, and her future. Homeless and desperate, she wandered back into the courthouse on a sweltering afternoon. The county was holding its quarterly tax deed auction, selling off abandoned properties to recoup decades of unpaid property taxes. Most of the plots were useless scraps of land, slivers of roadside ditches or unbuildable marshland. Sloane sat in the back row, watching investors in tailored suits buy up commercial zoning lots for fractions of their value. Then, the auctioneer cleared his throat. Parcel 402, 12 acres, Blackwood Quarry, unzoned, flooded, severe environmental liability. Minimum bid, $1,500. A low chuckle rippled through the room. Blackwood Quarry had been abandoned since the 70s. It was a massive, jagged scar in the earth filled with 40 feet of stagnant, algae-choked water. Local teenagers occasionally dared each other to jump off its limestone cliffs, but mostly it was known as a dumping ground for stolen cars and broken washing machines. It was an absolute liability. For a reason Sloane would later attribute to sheer, blind desperation, her hand shot up. The room fell dead silent. The auctioneer blinked, adjusting his glasses. "I have 1,500. Do I hear 1,600? No one moved. Vance Calder, who happened to be sitting in the second row scouting cheap land for a new warehouse development, turned around. A cruel, amused smirk spread across his face when he recognized her. He leaned over to his lawyer, whispering something that made them both laugh. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, striking the podium to the young woman in the back. 3 hours later, Sloane stood at the edge of her new empire. She had driven her newly purchased, rust-eaten 1998 Honda Civic, bought for $300 cash, down a deeply rutted dirt road until the trees gave way to a sheer, terrifying drop. The quarry was shaped like an irregular bowl, its walls carved from grey and white limestone. At the bottom lay a vast pool of black, glassy water that reflected the overcast sky like a dark mirror. The air smelled faintly of sulfur and decaying pine needles. She pitched a cheap nylon camping tent near the edge, her hands trembling as she hammered the plastic stakes into the hard earth. This was it. She owned dirt, rocks, and contaminated water. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the water, a rusted pickup truck rattled down the dirt path. An older man with deeply tanned, leathery skin stepped out. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a baseball cap bearing the logo of Kowalski's Hardware. "You the fool who bought Harlan Prescott's old pit?" the man asked, his voice like grinding gravel. Sloane stood up, wiping dirt from her jeans. "I'm the owner, yes, Sloane Harper." The man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the weeds. "Buck Rawlins. Used to work the heavy machinery here back before the company went belly up. Word of advice, kid. Don't drink the water, and don't go poking around the deep end. Prescott didn't just dig this hole for limestone." Sloane frowned, stepping closer. "Who is Harlan Prescott?" Buck laughed. a harsh, humorless sound. You really flew blind on this one, huh? Prescott owned half of Oak Haven back in the 30s. Bootlegger, banker, and a world-class crook. He owned this quarry. They say he used to hide his special imports out here when the feds came snooping. The state flooded it to stop the illegal dumping, but some of the old-timers swear Prescott left something down there. Course, nobody's ever found nothing but rust and snapping turtles. Buck tipped his hat and climbed back into his truck. Good luck, kid. You're going to need it. Sloane watched him drive away, her heart pounding a strange, chaotic rhythm. She looked back down at the impenetrable black water. She had hit rock bottom, but as she stared into the flooded abyss of Blackwood Quarry, a dangerous, thrilling thought began to take root in her mind. What if rock bottom was just the surface of something else? An unprecedented, blistering heatwave brought an intense drought to Oak Haven. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth until it cracked. Severe regional water restrictions swept across the state, and the water table beneath the Appalachian foothills plummeted to historic lows. For Sloane, who had been surviving on canned beans, instant coffee, and the sheer stubborn refusal to let Vance Calder win, the drought revealed something impossible. The water level in Blackwood Quarry was dropping fast. Every morning, Sloane marked the waterline on the limestone cliffs with a piece of chalk. The black water had receded, exposing the jagged, terraced shelves of the old mining operation. The smell of rotting algae and stagnant mud was overpowering, but Sloane could not tear herself away from the edge. On a suffocating afternoon, the sun caught a glint of metal protruding from the newly exposed mud on the southern wall. It was not the rusted frame of a washing machine or the bumper of a dumped Ford. It was a massive, industrial-grade iron chain. Sloane scrambled down the treacherous, slippery rock face, her boots sliding in the thick, grey sludge. When she reached the chain, she followed its length to the rock wall. Her breath hitched. The chain was not just discarded. It was bolted into a colossal, geometric slab of concrete, set flush against the natural limestone. And right in the center of the concrete was a heavily corroded circular steel wheel. It was a bulkhead door, a subterranean vault built straight into the side of the quarry, designed to be completely watertight. Her mind raced back to Buck Rawlins's words. Prescott used to hide his special imports out here. Nobody's ever found nothing but rust. The bottom half of the concrete slab was still submerged in murky water. If she wanted to open it, she needed to clear the water and mud away from the base, and she needed leverage. That afternoon, Sloane drove into town and walked into a pawn shop. She unclasped her late mother's vintage silver necklace, the very last piece of her old life, the only thing of value she had not sold to pay the bankruptcy lawyers. She walked out with $400 in cash. She drove straight to Kowalski's Hardware and rented an industrial gas-powered sump pump and 200 feet of heavy-duty discharge hose. She worked like a woman possessed. She hauled the heavy generator down the cliffside, slipping and bruising her ribs against the rocks. The roar of the engine echoed through the quarry from dawn until midnight, pumping thousands of gallons of foul, toxic water out of the basin and into the surrounding drainage ditches. She shoveled waist-deep mud away from the vault door, her hands blistering and bleeding inside her cheap canvas gloves. The pump sputtered and died, out of gas. But it did not matter. The base of the concrete slab was clear. Standing in ankle-deep mud, Sloane approached the massive steel wheel. It was fused with decades of rust. She grabbed a heavy iron crowbar she had found near her campsite, wedged it between the spokes of the wheel, and threw her entire body weight against it. Nothing. She screamed in frustration, kicking the unyielding steel. "Move!" she yelled, her voice cracking, echoing off the empty limestone walls. She thought of the bankruptcy judge. She thought of her empty bank account. She thought of Vance Calder's smug, triumphant smile in the courtroom. With a feral grunt, Sloane hoisted the crowbar again, wedged it deeper, and pulled with a desperate, tearing force. Crack! A shower of orange rust exploded from the hinges. The wheel groaned, an agonizing sound of metal grinding against metal, and shifted an inch. Panting, shaking with adrenaline, she pushed again and again. Slowly, the heavy locking mechanism disengaged. Sloane grabbed the edge of the heavy steel door and pulled. With a suctioning pop that disturbed the stagnant air, the door swung outward, breaking a vacuum seal that had held for nearly a century. A rush of cold, dry air hit her face, carrying the distinct scent of motor oil, aged leather, and undisturbed dust. She clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight and stepped over the elevated threshold. She was standing inside a massive, cavernous tunnel, reinforced with thick steel beams. The water had never breached it. The space was perfectly dry, preserved like a pharaoh's tomb. Sloane moved the beam of her flashlight across the darkness. Her heart stopped. There, sitting on custom-built wooden pallets, were rows of wooden shipping crates, stenciled with faded black lettering. A.S. Imports, 1935. But it was what sat beyond the crates that made the flashlight tremble in her hand. Underneath heavy, dust-covered canvas tarps sat the unmistakable, swooping silhouettes of automobiles. Sloane walked as if in a trance toward the nearest tarp and pulled it back. The canvas crumbled in her hands, revealing a pristine, midnight blue, 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC. Its chrome grille gleamed defiantly in the harsh light of her flashlight. Beside it sat a perfectly preserved 1931 Duesenberg Model J, and beyond that, an Aston Martin Ulster. Harlan Prescott had not just hidden liquor from the feds. He had hidden a fleet of stolen, priceless European luxury cars, an automotive treasure trove worth tens of millions of dollars in the modern classic car market. Tears streamed down Sloane's face, mixing with the dirt on her cheeks. She pressed her hand against the cold metal of the Bugatti. She was not bankrupt anymore. She was richer than she had ever dreamed. "Well, well, well." The voice echoed from the entrance of the vault, slicing through the silence like a scalpel. Sloane whipped around, blinding the intruder with her flashlight. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning sun, was Vance Calder. Beside him stood Philip Hargrove, the notoriously corrupt head of the Oak Haven Zoning Board, holding a thick manila folder. "I heard a rumor at the diner that you were pumping out the old Prescott pit," Vance said, stepping smoothly into the vault, his eyes widening with greedy disbelief as they adjusted to the gleaming chrome behind her. He pulled a crisp legal document from Hargrove's folder. "Unfortunately for you, Sloane, your deed only covers the topsoil and mineral rights. The county has an eminent domain claim on any historical artifacts found below sea level, and as of an hour ago, my development firm just purchased those rights." Vance smiled, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. "Step away from my cars, little girl." Sloane stood entirely still, the beam of her flashlight trembling slightly against the rusted steel walls of the vault. Vance Calder's laughter echoed through the cavern, a dry, grating sound that made her stomach twist. Beside him, Philip Hargrove, the notoriously corrupt head of the Oak Haven Zoning Board, tapped the manila folder against his palm with practiced arrogance. "Eminent domain," Sloane managed to say, her voice tight but remarkably steady. "You cannot seize private property without a public use justification. Building a warehouse is not public use." Hargrove stepped forward, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Actually, Ms. Harper, the county is seizing the subterranean rights for historical preservation. It just so happens that Mr. Calder's newly formed LLC, Oak Haven Heritage Trust, has been granted the exclusive municipal contract to excavate and manage any artifacts found on the premises. We filed the emergency injunction an hour ago." Vance took a step closer, his eyes raking over the pristine 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC. "You really thought you could win, Sloane? You bought a hole in the ground. I buy the people who write the laws. Now, hand over the keys to the gate. I have an extraction crew standing by." Sloane's mind raced. She was bankrupt and exhausted, but as she looked at Vance, the man who had stolen her future, destroyed her credit, and left her homeless, a cold, terrifying clarity washed over her. She noticed the slight bead of sweat on Hargrove's forehead. She noticed that Vance was rushing. If they truly had an ironclad legal right to the vault, they would not be threatening her in the mud at this hour. They would have arrived with the county sheriff to legally evict her. "No," Sloane said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Vance blinked, his smug smile faltering. "Excuse me? You have a preliminary injunction, Sloane said, bluffing with every ounce of confidence she could muster. "That gives you the right to petition a judge. It does not give you the right to trespass on my land, and it certainly does not give you the right to touch my property. Unless you have a signed warrant from a superior court judge, you are trespassing. Get out of my vault, Vance, or I will call the police and have you both arrested for breaking and entering." Hargrove looked nervously at Vance. "She's technically right, Vance. If the sheriff is not here to serve the paperwork, it is an illegal entry." Vance's jaw clenched. The mask of the untouchable businessman slipped, revealing the feral greed underneath. "You are delaying the inevitable, Sloane. You have a short window before a judge signs the final order. Enjoy the view while it lasts." He turned on his heel and marched out of the tunnel, Hargrove scurrying close behind. The moment their footsteps faded, Sloane's knees buckled. She collapsed against the cold concrete wall, gasping for air. She had bought herself exactly 2 days. She left the vault, chained the massive steel door shut with a heavy padlock from Kowalski's Hardware, and drove her sputtering Honda Civic straight to the Oak Haven Public Library. If Vance was using local laws to steal the cars, she needed to find a jurisdiction that trumped Oak Haven County. She sat in the dimly lit basement of the library, feeding reels of microfilm into an ancient viewing machine. She scoured newspapers from the 30s, looking for any mention of Harlan Prescott and stolen vehicles. Finally, her eyes burning and her vision blurring, she found it. A front-page article from the New York Times. "Great Auto Heist. European Imports Vanish from Freight Train." The article detailed how a specialized transport train carrying a fleet of ultra-rare European luxury cars bound for a Manhattan auto show had been derailed and robbed in the night. The cars had vanished without a trace. The authorities suspected a highly organized syndicate, but it was the last paragraph that made Sloane's heart hammer against her ribs. The catastrophic loss of the vehicles, valued at an unprecedented sum, has been entirely paid out by the underwriters at Lloyd's of London, who now retained the legal title to the stolen goods. Sloane sat back in her plastic chair, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. Vance Calder and the corrupt zoning board were relying on local municipal laws to claim abandoned property, but these cars were not abandoned. They were stolen goods, and under international and federal law, stolen property belongs to the victim, or, in this case, the insurance syndicate that paid the claim. Oak Haven County had zero legal jurisdiction over international insurance salvage. She had compiled a massive digital dossier. She needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. She needed someone who specialized in international salvage and asset recovery. After an hour of frantic web searches, she found Marcus Langston, a ruthless, high-profile maritime and recovery attorney based in New York City. She found his emergency legal hotline and dialed. A groggy answering service picked up. "I need to speak to Mr. Langston immediately," Sloane demanded. "Ma'am, it is the middle of the night. Mr. Langston is asleep. You can leave a message. Tell him Sloane Harper is calling. Tell him I am standing over the missing 1935 Lloyd's of London automobile shipment, including the Bugatti Type 57 SC. And tell him if he does not call me back in 5 minutes, I am calling his biggest competitor." She hung up. Minutes later, her phone rang. "This is Marcus Langston," a sharp, wide-awake voice barked through the receiver. "You have exactly 60 seconds to prove this is not a prank before I sue you for harassment. I have the VIN plates, original shipping manifests, and high-resolution photos of the chassis numbers," Sloane replied coolly. "I have secured the site, but a local corrupt developer is trying to seize them under a bogus eminent domain claim by morning. I need federal intervention, and I need a salvage contract." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a keyboard clacking echoed faintly. "Ms. Harper," Langston said, his tone entirely shifted to a predatory professional calm. "Where exactly are you?" "Oak Haven. I will be on a private jet out of Teterboro in an hour. Do not let anyone touch those cars." The morning of the deadline broke with a thick, oppressive humidity. At that precise moment, the ground near Blackwood Quarry began to vibrate. Sloane stood at the edge of the limestone cliff, arms crossed over her chest, watching as a convoy of heavy machinery rolled down the dirt road. There were 2 massive flatbed tow trucks, a hydraulic crane, and 3 Oak Haven County Sheriff's cruisers. Vance Calder stepped out of the lead vehicle, looking like a conqueror. He wore a tailored suit, completely out of place in the dirt and grime of the quarry. Philip Hargrove was by his side, clutching a freshly signed court order. "Time's up, Sloane," Vance shouted over the roar of the idling diesel engines. He waved the piece of paper in the air. "Signed by Judge Higgins himself. The county has officially seized the lower basin. If you do not step aside, the deputies have orders to arrest you for interfering with a municipal operation." Sloane did not move. She just stared at him, a bizarre sense of calm washing over her. "You went through an awful lot of trouble for this, Vance. The fake business, the bankruptcy. It was not an accident, was it?" Vance paused, his eyes narrowing. He gestured for the deputies to hold their position and walked closer to her, his voice dropping so the police could not hear. "You were a convenient pawn, Sloane. My grandfather was Harlan Prescott's accountant. I found the old maps in his attic 3 years ago. I knew the cars were down here, but if I just bought the land outright, people would ask questions. The state might investigate. I needed a distraction. I needed a naive little girl with a clean credit score to take the fall for a dummy corporation, so I could quietly buy up all the surrounding county land in the fallout." He smiled, a dark, venomous thing. "You were supposed to run away crying, but you bought the wrong parcel. A minor hiccup. I win anyway. Now get out of my way." "Actually," a booming, authoritative voice rang out from the tree line, "she is not going anywhere, and neither are you." Vance spun around. 4 black Chevrolet Suburbans with tinted windows tore down the dirt road, cutting off Vance's tow trucks. The doors swung open in unison. Marcus Langston stepped out of the lead SUV, adjusting his cuffs. He was flanked by 6 men wearing navy blue windbreakers with stark yellow lettering on the back, FBI Art Crime Team. "What the hell is this?" Vance demanded, his face flushing crimson. He turned to the local deputies. "Arrest them. They are trespassing on county property." The local deputies, seeing the federal badges, immediately holstered their weapons and took several large steps backward. Langston walked right up to Vance, towering over him. He pulled a thick, embossed leather folder from his briefcase. "Vance Calder, I am Marcus Langston, legal counsel representing Lloyd's of London. You are currently attempting to illegally excavate and steal insured assets belonging to my client, an act that constitutes federal interstate theft, international wire fraud, and grand larceny." "Those cars belong to the county under eminent domain," Hargrove shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Langston did not even look at Hargrove. He just held up a finger. "Eminent domain applies to abandoned property. These vehicles are stolen goods. Title of ownership transferred to Lloyd's of London when they paid out a $3 million insurance claim. Municipal zoning laws do not supersede international salvage and title law." Langston turned his sharp gaze to Vance. "Furthermore, my team has spent the last 24 hours reviewing the paperwork you filed with the zoning board. In your rush to steal Ms. Harper's discovery, you signed affidavits claiming you had no prior knowledge of the vault's contents to secure emergency excavation rights. A sworn statement to a government official?" Vance took a step back, the blood completely draining from his face. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Langston said smoothly. "Ms. Harper had the foresight to record your conversation in the vault 2 days ago, the one where you gloated about rushing the paperwork and paying off Mr. Hargrove here. The FBI has already executed a raid on your corporate offices. We found your grandfather's maps. We found the bribes you paid to the zoning board." Hargrove let out a pathetic squeak, dropping his manila folder into the mud. One of the federal agents stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Vance Calder, Philip Hargrove," the agent said, his voice flat and mechanical. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, perjury, and attempted theft of major artwork and historical artifacts." Vance's eyes were wide with a wild, cornered panic. He looked at the federal agents, then at the massive tow trucks he had brought, and finally, his gaze landed on Sloane. The young woman he had bankrupted, the woman he had treated as collateral damage, was standing tall, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "You!" Vance choked out, his voice trembling with rage as the federal agent slammed him against the hood of the cruiser and ratcheted the handcuffs around his wrists. "You took everything from me." "No, Vance," Sloane said softly, her voice carrying over the sound of the wind and the idling engines. "I just took back what was mine." Sometime later, the atmosphere inside the Sotheby's auction house in Monterey, California, was electric. The room was packed with the wealthiest classic car collectors in the world, oil tycoons and museum curators. Sitting in the front row, wearing a stunning custom-tailored emerald gown, was Sloane Harper. Beside her sat Marcus Langston, looking as sharp as ever. On the elevated stage, rotating slowly under brilliant, dramatic spotlights, was the pristine 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC. After months of careful restoration funded by Lloyd's of London, the car was a breathtaking masterpiece of automotive history. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the opulent hall, "we have a historic opportunity tonight. The Blackwood Bugatti. We will open the bidding at $20 million. Paddles shot up instantly across the room. The numbers climbed at a dizzying pace. 25, 28, 30. Sloane watched the frenzy with a serene smile. Under the Salvage and Recovery Act negotiated by Langston, Sloane, as the primary salver who located and secured the artifacts, was legally entitled to a 40% finder's fee of the total auction block value of all 12 cars found in the vault. $32 million, the auctioneer cried out, pointing to a bidder in the back. "Do I hear 33? Going once, going twice, sold for $32 million. The room erupted into applause. Sloane closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Vance Calder was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial, facing up to 20 years for fraud and corruption. The debt from Navicor had been legally nullified. She had walked into Oak Haven County Courthouse with $1,800 and a ruined life. She was walking out of Sotheby's with a net worth hovering around $45 million. She did not just survive rock bottom, she excavated it, polished it, and sold it to the highest bidder. Sloane's incredible journey proves that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden beneath our darkest moments. From absolute bankruptcy to a multi-million-dollar salvage triumph, her story is a masterclass in resilience and outsmarting the corrupt. If you loved this wild tale of revenge, hidden history, and ultimate justice, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and do not forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories.